Like Ant-Man would probably say, the smallest things can lead to the biggest surprises. That may be the case for Avengers Endgame, where a tiny throwaway line could be leading to the next big MCU shakeup. Because we all know that mutants are coming eventually, but could they actually already be here? If today's theory is to be believed, maybe, fans have latched on to a quick scene of dialogue from Endgame that was almost inaudible in theaters. But thanks to subtitles, a possible connection to not only the mutants, but also a brand new superhero might have just been made. So what's this line anyway? Let's dive in and discuss. In order to beat Thanos to the Infinity Stones, the Avengers pulled off a time heist, which saw them pair off and pluck the stones from different periods of time. Of course, BFFs Tony and Steve's first attempt to get the Tesseract goes horribly wrong, resulting in Loki running off with the stone to his own Disney Plus television show. This left them in quite the pickle, and they decided to go back to the 70s where they could get both the Tesseract and more Pym particles. This brought the two heroes face to face with their past. Tony got to share a nice conversation with his father, and finally got to resolve some of his daddy issues. And later, Howard Stark got to tell his wife that he met a strange fellow by the name of Howard Potts who was rocking some groovy facial hair. But Steve had a great interaction too. While trying to hide, he accidentally hops into the office of one Margaret Peggy Carter. Oh no! And then, before Cap can do anything, Cap gets to see his true love again. Well, technically, he saw an old version of her in the present, so let me rephrase. He got to see Haley Atwell's Peggy Carter again. Then the violin started to play, roses rained down from the sky, and Cap suddenly saw himself skipping through a field of daisies while holding hands with Peggy. Okay, fine, that's just what I believe Cap was thinking when he saw Peggy again. Or he was possibly thinking how he was going to break the news to her that he made out with her niece. One of those two things. No, I'm just poking fun at this scene. It's actually incredibly sweet. We see Cap mere feet away from his previous life, and he has to debate whether to ruin everything to say something to her. And it's probably this interaction that helps influence his decision at the end to go back and stay in the past with Peggy, after presumably returning all the stones. Though I'm still not sure how he returned the Reality Stone, but that's a question for some other time. And if you're like me, you were so swept up in the scene that the dialogue was completely lost to you. But the exchange that Peggy has with one of her subordinates not only hints at Britain's greatest superhero, but also the existence of mutants. In theaters, it's almost impossible to make out what Peggy is saying, mainly because the music is so loud. But with the added subtitles, it's fascinating. But first, shout out to Reddit user CBFW86 for catching this moment. Peggy tells someone to bring them in, but the man responds with, "They're trying, ma'am, but Braddock's unit has been stopped by lightning strikes." Peggy groans and says that she'll look at the weather projections. After reviewing a file, with Steve just inches from her, an alarmed Peggy rushes out of her office while saying, "It's not lightning strikes we're looking at." So what does this all mean? There is a lot to break down here in this small interaction. Let's get the obvious one out of the way first. The name Braddock is most likely a reference to Brian Braddock, who would become Captain Britain in the comics. And when you hear about lightning strikes in Marvel movies, two things should come to mind. The first is Thor, obviously, and we can rule him out, but the second is the mutant Storm. Could this be the first full reference to mutants existing in the current continuity of the MCU? It sounds like something strange is definitely afoot here. Even if the line ended with the no-name soldier saying that Braddock's unit was being held up by lightning, that already should raise a few eyebrows. But then the scene goes even farther than that by having Peggy make some sort of realization about the lightning strikes and rush out of the room? Come on, Endgame. Don't tease us like that. Don't say it's not lightning strikes they're looking at. Tell us what it is. Is it Storm? Why is she in the 70s? No, don't cut away to Tony finally having some catharsis over meeting his father. Who needs that? We want to know more about this lightning. Okay, I got a little carried away there. The Tony stuff is great, but this tease makes you question what Marvel had planned here. It's like it's designed to get you to ask questions. Imagine if the scene just name-dropped Braddock and called it a day. That's enough of a fun Easter egg to make hardcore fans smile. But by introducing how Braddock's unit is experiencing a weird phenomenon and then switching scenes before answering what the phenomenon actually is, that sounds like more of a seed planting than an Easter egg, doesn't it? So could Braddock be up against Storm here? Is that how the MCU is going to introduce the mutants? By having them here the whole time, but just earlier in the timeline than expected? That would be one way to retcon them into this franchise. Sure, it would be a little messy, but at least it's an explanation. It seems like the MCU has been enjoying venturing into the past recently. Captain Marvel was a nostalgic trip through the 90s, Black Widow is a prequel, the Eternals will tell a story spanning hundreds and hundreds of years. So imagine if the MCU decides to do something a little different with the X-Men and set a movie completely in the 60s and 70s. Wait, that's already been done. Fox's most recent X-Men franchise found great success in exploring the past. X-Men First Class was set in the 60s, and then the highest rated film of that franchise, X-Men Days of Future Past, was mostly set in the 70s. So I guess the MCU can't go this route or else they'll be too similar to the Fox franchise. And if the X-Men are going to have a long future in the MCU, they can't start off by copying what Fox did. So maybe this wasn't an adult Storm. Maybe it was a child Storm that the 70s version of S.H.I.E.L.D. encountered. In the comics, Storm lived in Egypt as a child and was raised to be a thief. She had a really rough childhood, to say the least. Maybe the MCU could go the route of around the 70s S.H.I.E.L.D. was interested in examining weird phenomenon, and it sends Braddock and his unit to Egypt to investigate where a young Storm releases her true powers. Maybe S.H.I.E.L.D.'s attempts to track down mutants results in mutants going underground and remaining hidden all this time. Sure, this kind of ignores Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and its history, but then again, when has the MCU ever really cared about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., or any of its television shows for that matter? So let's pivot for a moment, because maybe this scene means something completely different, but is still related to mutants. You'll notice in this exchange, they just say the name Braddock, but don't specifically mention if Braddock is male or female. Because what if this isn't a reference to Brian Braddock, but rather, what if it's referring to Betsy Braddock instead? Otherwise known as who? That's right, the mutant Psylocke. We've seen Psylocke on screen before, played by Olivia Munn in X-Men Apocalypse. And technically X-Men The Last Stand, which doesn't make a lot of sense unless you just throw out the blanket in-movie explanation of Wolverine changed the timeline. Or rather, the outside movie explanation of Fox literally doesn't care about continuity. Anyways, Psylocke is a mutant known for being able to manipulate psionic energy to make blades, blasts, and other cool things. I've heard she'd make you a psionic puppy if you asked nicely enough. And if you ever saw those in person, you'd be forgiven if you thought it was lightning blasts. Weird energy appearing at you and causing a ruckus? Yeah, it could be lightning. I don't know. I'm not stopping to fully analyze the situation. I'm running for cover. So here's another scenario. Betsy Braddock is leading her units when they get attacked by some unknown enemy, which forces her to use her mutant powers. That could be what Peggy was referring to when she said it's not lightning strikes we're looking at. Or just to explore all the options, maybe this is more just a reference to Captain Britain's origin story. One version of the hero's backstory is that Brian Braddock was in a near-fatal accident, but then the omniversal Guardian Roma appeared to him and offered him either the Amulet of Right or the Sword of Might. Not thinking he was a good warrior, he chooses the Amulet of Right, and that transformed Brian into Captain Britain. Maybe whatever lightning phenomena Braddock's dealing with is what would transform Braddock into a superhero, and the MCU is gearing up for a 70s adventure centering around him. I'm not sure how that would work in the movie franchise, but I could see this eventually becoming a Disney Plus TV show, couldn't you? Especially since Captain Britain's comic story is wild, as we find out that every Earth in the multiverse has its own Captain Britain, who are expected to defend every version of Britain ever, and together, all these Captain Britons make up the Captain Britain Corps. With the multiverse expected to play a big part in Phase 4, maybe Endgame was the right time to introduce Brian Braddock. Avengers Endgame was the conclusion of the Infinity Saga, and we were forced to say goodbye to some fan-favorite characters. But the movie did what it was supposed to do by putting a nice bow on everything that came before, while offering some tantalizing teasers for what comes next. Although Captain America and Iron Man are most likely done, the other big Avenger, Thor, set himself up for brand new adventures, and the Guardians of the Galaxy put themselves on the hunt to find the 2014 version of Gamora, who's now loose in the present timeline. But it wasn't just the big heroes who were primed for more adventures. One of the biggest talking points about a minor line came when Okoye mentioned an underwater earthquake. Even though it could just be a throwaway line, fans were quick to suggest this was actually a reference to the underwater city of Atlantis. But the scene we're talking about today didn't receive as much attention, but that's mainly because it was so hard to hear it. The music is so loud in the scene that fans are really only starting to notice the implications of Braddock and a possible X-Men connection thanks to the subtitles. Seriously, go back and watch that scene without subtitles and tell us what you think is being said. But I bet if this scene was more audible in theaters, this would have been the Easter egg that would have had people seriously talking as they debate what exactly Peggy was referring to. And as I was saying, Endgame was in a position to set up the future, because we know they're eventually coming. But we just don't know how yet. The most likely option is through the multiverse. But could we be in for a big swerve? Could it be possible that mutants were in the MCU this whole time and we just didn't know it? There would have to be a huge explanation of how this is possible to make it make sense, but I think the MCU is up for the challenge, don't you? So, do you think this was just a fun Easter egg, or will it lead to something down the line? Just for fun, let us know in the comments how you would retcon mutants into the existing MCU timeline, and be sure to hit that subscribe button for more awesome MCU content like this.